You may not believe this, but on my honeymoon, the moment that was supposed to be the sweetest of my life, my husband leaned in and whispered something that shattered my entire world. You'll never be enough. My ex was better than you in bed. I sat there, in a luxurious restaurant, staring at my own reflection in the mirror and failing to recognize the woman looking back. The dress he had chosen, the hairstyle he had decided, the meal he had ordered. I had already become a shadow in a marriage that had only just begun. And right then, in that very moment, I knew one thing: I would no longer stay silent. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is the journey of how I reclaim myself step by step, through observation, through planning, and in the end, through a revenge so precise, it made his entire world collapse before everyone's eyes. Chapter 1. The moment in the mirror. When he said I would never be enough. I still remember that moment vividly in a luxurious restaurant in Napa Valley. Every detail was so perfect it felt artificial: crystal glasses catching the glow of chandeliers, the soft hum of jazz couples around us laughing and whispering affectionately. I sat before a mirror, staring at my own reflection. A woman impeccably dressed in the expensive dress Corey had chosen her hair, pinned neatly in the exact style he preferred, sitting quietly like a supporting actress in the movie of her own life. When had I become this person, I wondered? Someone who let another decide what she would wear, eat, drink, even how she should sit. The answer came immediately after, when Corey leaned toward me, his lips curving into a faint smile. I once thought that smile was charming, but now it felt cold and distant. And then he whispered the words that shattered my heart. You'll never be enough. My ex was better than you in bed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't an outburst. He said it as if he were reporting the weather-detached calm, certain. In that moment, the entire world around me seemed to stop. Sounds blurred away, leaving only those words piercing through my mind. I looked into the mirror once more and realized I was no longer the woman who once laughed uncontrollably while eating spicy curry on our first date. The woman who loved adventure, who lived fully, who was unapologetically herself. That woman had been eroded piece by piece until nothing remained but a shadow that nodded and smiled. I heard myself whisper, barely audible, "When did I lose myself?" Corey didn't bother to look up. He only shrugged, slicing a piece of bread neatly before replying, "You were never really yourself. I'm just trying to help you become a better version. But you're not improving fast enough." Those words cut deeper, like another blade twisting into me. And in that instant, I understood these years had never been about love, nor about care. It had been an erasure, Corey systematically molding me into who he wanted, and I had allowed it. In the mirror, I saw my shoulders tremble, but this time, it wasn't only humiliation. There was something else stirring, like a small spark flickering amid cold ashes. A whisper in my head, "Enough. From here on, everything will change." That night, when I left the restaurant, I was no longer the silent woman. I didn't yet know exactly what I would do, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never again let him decide my worth. Chapter 2. The Map of Control. When I became a puppet in his story, I began to recall all the details that once seemed insignificant, but had quietly unfolded over time. Corey always knew how to impose his will without ever having to give a direct order. All he had to do was smile and say his familiar line, "Trust me, I know what you like better than you do." And slowly, I actually believed him. At first, it was the tiniest things. I love spicy food, but every time I tried to order, he would stop me, choosing something more refined instead. I loved the comfort of jeans, but he would hand me tight dresses, accompanied by a sweet compliment. "You look beautiful, like this, worthy of me." Then it became my hairstyle, my makeup, even the way I laughed. He shaped me bit by bit until I became the perfect version in his eyes. I started to realize that the things I once loved were vanishing. I no longer ordered the dishes I wanted, no longer chose my own clothes, no longer dared to laugh wholeheartedly as I once did. I had turned into a woman who knew how to sit properly, how to smile just enough, how to keep silent at the right time. In other words, I had become a puppet in the script he had written. The worst part was that all this time I believed it was love. I truly thought Corey was upgrading me, shaping me into a woman worthy of him. I mistook control for care and position, for protection. But that night, when he so casually compared me to his ex, I looked back at everything and saw it clearly. I had been worn down piece by piece. I was no longer myself. I was a product Corey had crafted to display to the world. And in that moment, a thought sparked within me. If he could change me bit by bit, then I could also change myself back. I could reclaim myself one piece at a time. I didn't yet know where I would begin, but I knew one thing for certain: this game of control had reached its end. Chapter 3, Stepping Outside, when I dared to be seen. I still remember that moment like a wave, breaking open inside my chest. When Corey uttered the words, "Everything is a test and you are failing," I felt as though I were being suffocated. The luxurious restaurant suddenly seemed too small, too stifling, as if there wasn't enough air left for me to breathe. I pushed my chair back, my hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "I need to go outside." Corey immediately frowned, his voice sharp and cold. "We're not finished. People are watching." I looked straight into his eyes, and for the first time in years, I answered, "Then let them watch." I turned and walked away, leaving behind Corey's stunned expression and the sudden hush that fell over the surrounding tables. I walked toward the door, past the surprised gaze of the waiters, past the hostess's forced smile, and then the door closed and the outside world rushed in. The cool night air brushed against my face like an unexpected gift. I inhaled deeply, and it felt as though I was breathing for the very first time after years of living under his shadow. I stood there alone on a street glowing with lights, and for the first time I felt truly alive. Through the restaurant's glass window, I could still see Corey sitting there, head bent over his phone, completely indifferent to whether I returned or not. Perhaps deep down he even felt relieved not having to manage my imperfections for a few minutes. But for me, those 15-20 minutes outside were a rebirth. I could feel it clearly. Something within me had shifted. I no longer feared the eyes of strangers, no longer worried about Corey's reputation. I cared about only one thing: whether I had the courage to take another step, to walk away from the invisible cage I had allowed him to build around me. When I returned to the table, Corey barely looked up. He only asked curtly, feeling better before launching back into a monologue about the photo he had just posted and the likes climbing in real time. But I was no longer the woman I had been an hour earlier. I sat there, quietly listening, but inside I had switched roles. I was no longer the wife desperately trying to please him. I had become an observer, silently gathering every detail as if I were writing a journal only for myself, and in that journal, Corey was no longer the center. Chapter 4, The Naked Habits. When I learned to observe. Back at the hotel, I began to look at Corey with different eyes. Before, I used to consider his routines as signs of discipline, proof of a man who lived with structure and plans. But now all of it seemed like cold, mechanical gears turning endlessly, so repetitive and bare that it was almost laughable. Every evening, after we returned to the room, Corey would dive straight into his ritual, arranging the lights, adjusting the curtains, then standing before the mirror or the window to take photos. He would lose himself in staring at his reflection on his phone, tweaking every angle, every detail, before spending tens of minutes crafting captions and selecting hashtags. I realized this cycle always lasted exactly 14 minutes. At first, I found it irritating. Later, I began to memorize it. He never noticed that while he was consumed with constructing his image for the world, I was silently observing the truth of who he really was. Selfish, self-absorbed, and utterly blind to the woman sitting next to him. I became a quiet shadow, but a shadow that listened, that remembered, that prepared. In the mornings when he woke, he reached for his phone before even greeting me. His fingers would scroll swiftly across the screen, as if the value of a new day could only be measured in likes from strangers. I often sat silently watching him, and for the first time I no longer felt sad. Instead, I felt as though I were observing a test subject. I began recording everything: where he kept his passport, how he tossed his wallet onto the table without ever locking the drawer, how he dismissed the hotel staff and never once said thank you. Each small detail became a fragment, a puzzle piece. I didn't yet know exactly where it would lead me, but I could sense it. I was slowly taking hold of a kind of power he had no idea I possessed. Inside that luxurious hotel room, Corey went on performing his play in front of the camera. Meanwhile, behind him, I was quietly writing a new script for my own life, and this time he would have no right to edit it. Chapter 5. The Secret Room, When I Became Sarah Mitchell. Again, the next morning, Corey was still fast asleep. He kept his usual habit of draping an arm over me as if marking his territory, though he had never truly cared how it made me feel. I quietly slipped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, yet my footsteps steady. I wasn't going to the spa as I had told him. I was going to find myself again. The hotel was vast and luxurious, but I had already begun to understand its rhythm. The hours when housekeeping passed by the shift changes at the front desk, the exact time it took for the elevator to move between floors. I walked as though tracing a path through a maze, yet inside me everything felt illuminated with clarity. I went straight to the reception desk and smiled. "Please book me another room under the name Sarah Mitchell." It had been so long since I last heard my own name aloud, the name I had carried for the first 28 years of my life before I lost it on a marriage certificate. When the receptionist handed me the new key card, I felt as though I had been given back a piece of my soul. The room was far smaller than the lavish suite Corey had reserved, but to me, it was a fortress. I began to prepare, stashing away my passport and personal documents, activating a new phone with a number no one knew, hiding a small bag with clothes I truly liked. Everything was arranged neatly, secretly, like a safe house. Each time I returned to Corey, I slipped back into the role of the obedient wife he wanted. I let him adjust my pose for photos, listened as he complained about the food or the staff. He never suspected that inside my wallet, alongside the key card he trusted, lay another one, the key that could set me free whenever I chose. That night, as I lay beside Corey, a realization came to me. He had spent 3 years trying to shape me into the woman he wanted, but in just a few days, I had already begun finding my way back to myself. And I knew with certainty that very soon the room under the name Sarah Mitchell would not just be a hiding place, it would be the doorway that led me out of the prison he had built. Chapter 6. When the mask fell, his true self. I began to see Corey through different eyes. Before, I had mistaken his coldness for strength, his arrogance for confidence. But with each passing day inside that hotel, I saw more clearly another man altogether, a Corey, who looked nothing like the glamorous image he built online. He treated the staff as though they were less than human. When a young girl brought up coffee a little late, Corey scowled and snapped, "Don't you know VIP guests are supposed to be served on time?" When a housekeeper accidentally dropped a towel, he glared and sneered. "Do you even know how to clean properly? I bet your family's never set foot in a luxury suite." I sat in silence, watching, no longer feeling embarrassed on his behalf the way I once had. Instead, it felt as though I were peeling away the glossy layers of his mask. On Instagram, Corey smiled radiantly, addressing staff as dear and buddy to cultivate the image of a gentleman. But in real life, he saw them only as tools to elevate his own status. What startled me most was that Corey had no idea I was watching him differently now. He was so absorbed in playing his part as the powerful man that he didn't notice I was recording every detail in my mind, a silent witness to his truth. The more I saw these petty cruelties, the more I realized it wasn't just me. Anyone who stayed close to Corey would eventually be belittled. To him, a person's worth existed only in how well they served the image he wanted to project. And in that moment, I felt my fear of Corey vanish. A man who needs to trample on others just to feel bigger is not powerful at all. His contempt for everyone around him was the very thing that awakened me. It became my fuel feeding my resolve. My plan could not be merely to escape. It had to be the perfect ending, one that returned to Corey everything he had ever inflicted. Chapter 7, The Technical Move. When I swapped control. Corey was so absorbed in his virtual world that he never noticed the little things. But every detail he dismissed became a crucial piece in my plan. One evening, while he was lost in editing his selfies in the bathroom, I slipped his room keycard out of his wallet and deftly replaced it with the one for the secret room, under the name Sarah Mitchell. To him, those plastic cards looked identical, but I knew one of them would no longer open the door to the luxurious suite he so proudly called his own. I didn't stop there. Every time Corey booked a service, I smiled sweetly and reminded the receptionist to charge everything to Mr. Blackwell's account. The meals he insisted on ordering for me, the bottles of wine he demanded for photo ops, the spa treatments he forced me to try to look more elegant. Every single expense down to the last dollar was billed to him. His wallet wasn't safe either. One night while Corey slept soundly, I quietly removed each card, each important document, leaving behind only a few crumpled bills, just enough for a bus fare. Even his passport, the one he believed was hidden securely in a drawer, now rested in my handbag alongside my own 2 living proofs that the balance of power had shifted. He remained oblivious, still grinning smugly into the camera, still convinced he was in control of everything. But in silence, I knew move by move I was turning the board around. And for the first time in years, I was no longer the pawn being moved. I was the one holding the pieces. Chapter 8, The Last Night. When I left my final note. On the last night before leaving, I lay in the dark, listening to Corey's steady breathing beside me. In his sleep, his face looked strangely peaceful, almost harmless, but I knew better it was only a facade. Behind that calm exterior was a man who had worn me down, piece by piece, turning love into control, turning me into a ghost within my own life. I sat up and quietly slipped out of bed. The lavish room he had chosen suddenly looked cold, like a gilded prison. I opened the drawer and pulled out the note I had prepared beforehand. On it, in my own handwriting, were just 4 words: "Not your burden anymore." I placed it on the pillow next to him, right where his hand would reach when he woke. I didn't write a speech, didn't explain, didn't justify. Corey had never listened to me when I stood right in front of him. Why should I waste words? Now I opened the closet and took out the small bag I had prepared. Inside were the things that truly belonged to me, my passport, bank cards, a few keepsakes, and comfortable clothes of my own choosing. I looked around one last time. The red dress he had forced me to wear. The high heels he insisted fit the image. The pearl necklace he claimed made me look more sophisticated. All of it I left behind. I didn't need them anymore. As I closed the door to the suite, I didn't tremble, nor did I feel regret. What I felt was a strange, overwhelming relief, as though after years of suffocating in that room, I had finally opened a door to fresh air. I knew that tomorrow, when Corey woke, his carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. And me, I would begin again. Chapter 9, The Chaotic Morning. When his world collapsed at dawn, the next morning I sat in my secret room. By the window, overlooking the hotel courtyard, a hot cup of coffee in my hand, my heart felt strangely at peace. I imagined the moment Corey would wake, reach across the bed, and find the note with the 4 short words I had left for him. And then, just as I had predicted, it began. Less than an hour later, the phone in my secret room buzzed with notifications from the hotel system. I remember the service logs flashing on the screen. 7:23 a.m. Guest in room 847 reported key card malfunction. 7:31 a.m. Guest called again complaining about the electronic system. 7:45 a.m. Security dispatched after reports of banging and shouting. I smiled, picturing Corey in his bathrobe, furiously swiping the key card against the lock, unable to understand why it wouldn't work. Each time he called, the answer was the same. "Sorry, sir. The system still recognizes your room as 847, but the card you're using doesn't match. He had no idea I had swapped his key days ago, but that was only the beginning. The hotel logs continued. 8:12 a.m., guest requested billing review due to unreasonable charges. 8:18 a.m., guest engaged in loud argument at reception. 8:31 a.m., guest escorted to lobby by security. From above, I could almost hear Corey shouting. The lavish dinners, the spa treatments, the wine bottles, every luxury he had forced on me to look refined had now been charged directly to his account. The bill over $4,000 left him with no room for denial. Yet the final blow was still waiting. 9:23 a.m. Security log entry guest reported missing passport, unable to provide identification. I laughed out loud, my voice echoing in the small room. That passport rested safely in my handbag alongside mine, silent, secure, beyond his reach. Without it, Corey was nothing but a nameless figure in a 5-star hotel, unable to fly home, unable to even prove who he was. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for finally arrived. At 11 a.m., I looked down through the glass window and saw Corey in the lobby. He wore a hotel bathrobe slippers on his feet, hair disheveled, face flushed with rage. A few receptionists tried to maintain their polite facade, but I caught the weariness in their eyes. To them, Corey was no longer a VIP guest. He was just a nuisance. He flailed with his phone, no doubt trying to call me, but mine remained silent in my bag, powered off long ago. I watched the scene without the slightest flicker of pity. For 3 years, I had let him make me small weak, and now in just one morning, he had become the most pitiful man in everyone's eyes. I took another sip of coffee, my heart serene. Corey's world had finally collapsed, and all it had taken from me was knowing exactly when to let go. Chapter 10, Portland, when I found myself again. That afternoon, I sat on a flight leaving Napa Valley, bound for Portland. For the first time in years, I wasn't flying on a schedule Corey had arranged. I didn't have to choose a seat for the perfect lighting in his photos, nor did I have to worry about him complaining about the in-flight meal. I simply sat there by the window, watching the clouds drift by and feeling one simple thing: freedom. When I landed in Portland, I chose not to stay in another luxury hotel. Instead, I rented a small attic room above an old bookstore. The landlady, an elderly woman with silver hair and warm eyes, asked me only one question: "Are you running away or finding your way back?" I hesitated for a moment before answering, "Maybe both." She only smiled, as though that was the most honest and correct thing anyone could say. That evening, I ordered spicy food Thai, the kind Corey always mocked as not sophisticated. I ate it all, tears streaming from the heat, but they were tears of happiness. For the first time in years, I ate exactly what I wanted, without needing anyone's permission. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim the small things I thought I had lost. I spent mornings wandering through the farmer's market, choosing vegetables and fruit, just because I liked them. I spent afternoons in cafes reading books Corey had once dismissed as a waste of time. And in the evenings, I called my sister, not to ask for help, not to complain, but simply to hear her voice. There was nothing grand about it, no dramatic transformation like in the movies. But each of those small moments was worth more to me than all the dresses Corey ever forced me to wear, or the polished photos he posted online to prove his perfect life. One morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I noticed my eyes were different. No longer tired, no longer faded into a shadow. Instead, there was a woman real alive with a smile that was entirely her own. I whispered, "Hello, Sarah Mitchell. It's so good to see you again." Chapter 11, I am enough for myself. As time passed, I began to realize a truth I had never dared to believe. Before, I didn't need Corey or anyone's approval to feel my own worth. Back when I lived under his arm, I constantly asked myself, am I enough? Am I beautiful enough? Smart enough? Refined enough for him? And Corey's answer was always no. He made me believe I had to change to be worthy. But once I broke free, I understood the problem had never been me. It had always been him, a man who could only feel tall by making others small. In Portland, I slowly reclaimed a life of my own. The smallest habits once dismissed as meaningless became proof that I was truly free, eating what I wanted without fear of ridicule, choosing books I loved without hearing his sarcasm, laughing loudly when something delighted me without worrying about judgmental eyes. One afternoon, as I wrote in my old journal, I noticed my hand was steadier, my heart calmer. No more anger, no more pain. Only clarity remained. I am enough. Enough to live, enough to love myself, enough to keep moving forward without anyone's permission. Corey once said I would never be enough. He was right, but in a way he could never comprehend. I will never be enough for a man who needs to turn his wife into a shadow just to feel powerful. But I will always be enough for myself, and that is what matters most. As the sun set over Portland light spilling through the small window, I smiled. No staged photos, no toxic whispers, just me, peace, and a new beginning. For the first time in years, I was truly myself, and that was more beautiful than anything Corey had ever promised. Looking back, I realized revenge doesn't always have to be loud, nor does it need to destroy everything. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth reveal itself and then walking away, head held high to live a better life without ever looking back. Corey once said I would never be enough. He was right only in the sense that I will never be enough for a man who needs me small just so he can feel big. But for myself, I will always be enough. And after everything, I found freedom, peace, and a life that I alone control. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to support me. Don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Vows to hear more true stories about betrayal, about revenge, and most importantly, about the power every woman carries within her heart.